Good afternoon, Zain. Kifak, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I am very excited to be reconnected with you.
Same here. The feeling is mutual.
We've known each other for more than 30 years, which is exactly the age of ASI.
Oh, really?
Yeah, this is the 30th year.
Wow.
Zain, before we start, I would like you to introduce yourself and address the multifaceted aspects of your work and your life.
Sure. I've been in DC, living in DC for the last 20 years as an activist, community and otherwise. I teach at 3 universities. I teach at American University, Arab World Studies. I teach at Washington University. I teach international affairs at the Elliott School of International Affairs, and I also teach Arabic media at the Elliott School of International Affairs, and I teach at Georgetown. I teach Arabic language and Arab film in a spring session, and I'm a published writer and a poet also, and I have my first collection of short stories coming up. I thought that I would have a collection of poetry published before short stories, but that's I have no control over the publishing world, but that's I'm really excited about that project.
I'm going to put your book cover on the screen if you can tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. It's a collection of 7 short stories that I worked on. They span the world that I lived in, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, of course the United States. And a lot of them relate to stories that have happened in my childhood. And there's 2 stories that center around Derkifa, the village which I came from in South Lebanon. And there are stories like one that is about a 70-year-old woman that runs out of cigarettes during the 2006 war in Lebanon, and basically has to stop a Hezbollah platoon in order that she detains them for half an hour, basically while she's asking them to get her cigarettes, urging them to get her cigarettes. There are stories like the title story, which is This How You Eat a Watermelon? It centers around basically a character that is living in Beirut, obviously, that is basically eating and drinking himself to death. And he's, in essence, he's a stand-in for Beirut itself. And there's a story that is based on my imprisonment in Bahrain.
Okay, tell us about that.
So I was...
I don't know why I'm laughing.
Yeah.
Because when I tell the story about my own civil disobedience imprisonment, of which you were some sort of a part, a witness, I also smile.
Yeah, and I also always tell the joke about the handcuffs. Remember when
my joke? Yeah. I don't know if it's appropriate, if it's broadcast appropriate.
But I love that story. Yeah. So basically, I went to high school in Bahrain, and I went to college in Saudi Arabia. And one year, in my first year of college, I wanted to return and visit my friends in Bahrain. And it coincided with what the Bahraini government called an attempted coup by the Shia majority there to take over, attempted coup on the government. And I was totally unaware of that. I came on this plane, 15-minute flight. I arrive. First day I'm there. Basically, I'm detained because I pass by the Minister of Interior's house, and I'm labeled a suspected terrorist, taken to prison, and thrown in there like all political prisoners there, without informing anybody. At the time, I had a green card. I didn't have citizenship, but my friends who were waiting for me, I was supposed to play tennis with them, who were waiting for me, just assumed that I bailed out on them. And it wasn't in the days of cell phones or anything like that. So basically, they had to search all the hospitals and the prisons before they found me.
Wow.
And it started a whole campaign across the way in Saudi Arabia with my family, getting together with officials from the U.S. government to try to get me out, because there were rumors that the people that were specifically in the prison that I was in, that were being taken out in the desert and being disappeared. And so they there was basically my parents were told, prepare for the worst. And so I ended up spending a week there before I was whisked away from the prison after the American ambassador in Bahrain intervened, and I was taken flown to Saudi Arabia.
And wow, okay, is that for another jail? I'm just
No, I was worried. I was so panicked by that time.
Exactly. It's like I'd rather stay in a jail in Bahrain.
Yeah.
And you, of course, have probably more details in the book about this episode.
Of course, yeah. The whole thing was published by Merip.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Zain, today we are speaking about the adjunct world.
Yes, yeah.
And the new realities that are in many ways old realities of adjunct labor, which is sometimes called slave labor, but also with the emergence of new crises like the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. We have yet another deepening of problems that have touched the entire academic world, not just adjuncts, but of course, because adjuncts and graduate students are sort of at the bottom of the ladder in a way, they have been hit even harder by this. My first question to you is, tell us a little bit about your own adjunct experience before you get to talk a little bit about adjunct life and adjunct experiences in this day and age in academia, virtually anywhere, in the rural or urban areas, in Ivy League schools, secondary or primary level universities. So if you can just share with us your experience first and something about the broader context of the adjunct world.
Of course. So now many people aren't aware that 70% of professors across the nation are actually adjuncts, and the number of adjuncts have been increasing over the last decade in an exponential manner. And for example, where I teach at American University, 40% of the professors there are actually adjuncts, and students weren't aware until recent negotiations that we've had and actions we had on campus, that there are adjuncts, and they're not getting exactly an adjunct discount. The people don't realize a lot of times when I talk with my students, when I started negotiations with American University, which is like my primary home right now, because I started to teach Arab World Studies, and another course called Morocco Bound. So I started with American University about 4 years ago, and I'm really happy with the student body, and the course that I teach there, especially the Arab World Studies, has been a course that students say it's not just merely that they've learned a lot, it's just they find it to be life-changing. Wow. Negotiations started at American University in terms of a new adjunct contract about 9 months ago now. And I had complained to my union, SEIU, about the salary that I'm getting, which is with no benefits. But to give you an idea, and I know Americans are told not to share their salary, and I think people should be open about these things, because students who are strapped in debt, and their parents are strapped in debt for a lifetime, should be aware of what the schools are actually paying these adjuncts. Well, I wore my price tag when the negotiations started heating up, I started to wear my price tag on my, that's actually a price tag with my salary on it, which is $3,785 to teach a 3-credit course with no benefits.
Wow.
Yeah, and once the students, they would ask me, what's this on your shoulder? And I would tell them, they were like so shocked. And then they try to figure out who's among the professors that are teaching them, who's an adjunct, who's full-time, who's et cetera. And they really have had, similar experiences. There's no difference for them in terms of the education they're receiving. And it's largely also because a lot of these adjuncts are teaching out of love for teaching, because it's certainly not the salary. So with after 6 months of negotiations, we were starting to compare what's happening at American University with what's happening with the other universities that I'm teaching at, and what's happening at Howard University, where they're having also a labor struggle that lasted a long time, and they won some good gains with that. And we realized that American University pays the lowest of all, and it doesn't give nearly the support that, for example, George Washington University, and especially not the support that I get at Georgetown University, where I have an assistant for grading and everything. So I'm really satisfied with there. It's specifically American University that's become to represent what's happening in the adjunct world across the nation. And after 6 months of negotiations where there were no gains, where they kept on telling us it's COVID time, and that's what I want to get into, what COVID time is. Yeah. So it's COVID time, and it's like, this is not the time to ask for a raise because we're coming out of this catastrophe. And the reality is that endowments for all universities have actually increased during COVID time. So it was a lie. And ironically, the university has a slogan in the past few years. It's change can't wait. So we adopted that. So when we're on the Zoom negotiations, we have change can't wait behind us, the AU banner. So every time they say this is not the time, we say change can't wait.
Nice.
And we point to it. So they gave us like a sort of a gift. So obviously we took a different angle. After 6 months, they brought in a new organizer, an SEIU, the union that's SEO 500, which organizes the adjuncts at all those 3 universities, brought in a new team, and things, instead of dropping off, escalated. And so the bargaining committee turned from 2 people, me and 1 other adjunct and an organizer, to 25
Wow.
adjuncts. And this new organizer that came from New York put together an amazing team. And we've been having rallies, and that's why we got that big article, with the Washington Post, that basically the Washington Post reporter and a photographer followed me for a week throughout the 3 universities, and it was featured on the front cover of the Metro section. And that Washington Post article was important because it got the attention, for example, of the Attorney General of Washington, D.C., and their office met with us and discussed what's happening. And they found out that if you count the hours that we actually work and divide our salary by those hours, that we're actually being paid less than minimum wage. And that opens up American University to be sued really by the Attorney General if they chose to do so, because you can't pay below minimum. It's against the law. So that's where we're at right now. And the summer, of course, there's a lull, as you know, in activity, but we're still in negotiation, we're still fighting, and it's become a regional issue. And if indeed the Attorney General chooses to basically step up the issue legally, then it'll cause an earthquake regionally in terms of other universities that have to get it together when it comes to treating adjuncts fairly.
I just put up your the article which has your picture up top. Can
Yeah.
you want to say more about it?
Yeah. So the article shows me carrying 3 bags. You can't see the third bag, but 3 bags, one for each university, because all my books and all the materials, the multimedia stuff that I have, is in a different bag and helps me organize because I have to go to all 3 universities in the same day. And the Washington Post followed me throughout that week to basically photograph me and talked about the issues. And it's a very well researched article. And I was lucky in the fact that the journalist from the Washington Post is actually an alumni of American University, who was who was shocked at what's happening there. And so that's basically the article, and and it got a lot of attention. And I got messages from adjuncts regionally and even from the West Coast saying, thank you for bringing up this issue. It's been too long coming, you know.
That was my second question, and that is the extent to which you are organizing, not just locally, but regionally in Virginia or on the East Coast or nationally. Can you tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah, around the adjuncts, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. So basically,
I know.
yeah.
I have to tell you this because
Yeah.
you're involved in so many causes. Yeah, we're talking adjuncts.
Yeah. So basically, right now the focus is obviously on getting a deal done. Especially now, we have a situation where we have a president at American University who used to be the Secretary for Health and Human Services in the Obama administration. And it's really interesting because this is kind of represents what the Obama administration did, which is carry forward, these neoliberal policies by also and also camouflaging it with identity politics. But what our president at American University is doing exactly that, and is unbending. But recently, she had announced that they're actually going to put more resources into pay and other things, but she didn't specify. We never know whether we're sort of invisibilized as an adjunct. So even when she talks about putting resources in terms of salaries and stuff, sometimes we don't even know if that includes us. So now we're putting pressure to finalize this contract, which is the negotiations should have never gone this far or taken this long. But there's an increased participation and there is increased actions wherever she goes. If she's going to address alumni at the Kennedy Center, and that's covered in this article, we went there to talk with the alumni and say, you're going to make donation, you've been making donations to the university, but obviously the frontline educators, these adjuncts, are being ignored by the president that just addressed you. And so we're trying to put pressure everywhere she's going, including graduations and all of these things, to get her, to force her to. She hasn't even given us 10 or 15 minutes in terms of face-to-face discussion. Even when we camped outside of her office, she sent like a third-tier person that pretended to listen to us, and her eyes were glazing over as adjuncts cried about there was a single mother that's raising 2 children and an adjunct salary, and she was crying. And you could see this woman didn't really care. She was just sent out there to say, we sent somebody from the president's office to talk with the adjuncts.
That's sufficient.
Yeah, so that's where we're at right now.
Sorry about all of this. I can't tell you how first of all connected I am to this topic, because it actually did come up numerous times at George Mason University. It's also an issue that we raised at the Middle East Studies Pedagogy Initiative in one of our newsletters, responding to strikes by graduate students and adjuncts last year, perhaps around the same time that a lot of this commotion was taking place. Can you tell us, Zain, a little bit about the 2021 academic year or last year, which is often called the year of resignation,
Exactly.
which is something that is not just affecting academia, by the way, but it's definitely affecting academia and affecting people beyond adjunct. How has this impacted the adjunct world and adjuncts themselves?
Yeah, that's key. That's a key question. And one of the things that American University did is they hire a union busting firm.
Wow.
And
They have these? Oh, of course.
yes, yeah. So
If there's
I
if
was
there's
like,
a demand, there's a supply.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So they have actually a union busting lawyer that is actually heading up. His name is Lewis Cannon. I call him Loose Cannon, and he's the person. Imagine you go to negotiations, and he's the person that knows least about education and specifically higher education, but knows everything about union busting. And that's the main person that's talking with us across the table, right? And then there are people from American University administration who are sitting there meekly, listening, and he's sort of leading the way. So the most important thing that came out is that his mantra was, this is not the time to ask for a raise. Why? Because we're coming out of COVID and there was a drop in enrollment and all of this stuff. So all these excuses were lies because, first of all, the university newsletters themselves were sort of declaring that, first of all, there's an increase in enrollment. After COVID, the endowments have increased tremendously. Whatever we may say about the Trump years, the endowments have actually increased because the stocks have gone up. And so they are also raised the tuition. So it was the year. But beyond that, related to what you asked about, Bassam, is that, when they said this is not the time, I was telling you earlier that we adopted the university slogan, which is change can't wait. And we would say, no, change can't wait. We have to have this change, this correction soon. And when they kept on persisting with this mantra, we reminded them that 2021 was indeed called the year of resignations and the year of worker strife in general. And what I mean about that, most people know now that the first Amazon hub was organized in the wake of that year. It came out of that kind of organization. Yeah. And now we have all these Starbucks, unheard of, unionizing left and right. But also, I always think of Arundhati Roy during COVID and during that year, writing this essay called "The Pandemic is a Portal," and she's always been, she's always thought dialectically. For those of you who don't know, she's the Indian author and activist, that won the Pulitzer Prize for, God of Small Things and so on. But she's an amazing thinker. She thinks dialectically about things and takes a catastrophe and tries to find a way how to flip it, how to turn the catastrophe into an opportunity. And with the pandemic, she thought of the pandemic as a portal. And I thought about this for a long time because the negotiations were going as Arundhati Roy released this thing. And what she's saying is basically that it's an opportunity to leave things behind and an opportunity to adopt things that helped us get through this and carry it through that portal. Nice. And yeah, so when we gathered, when we huddled as adjuncts and organizers outside of the negotiations, I brought up this issue and I say that we actually have to call it the year of change. And why is there? We talked a lot about why this year, why did this happen? And some of what came out is the fact that people kind of stepped out of the rat race. They're sort of like on this wheel, right, chasing the carrot, and they stepped out of that rat race and they thought about their careers. They thought about what they're getting paid. They thought about
and what everything meant.
What everything meant, exactly. And so that's why they weren't accepting For example, even at McDonald's and Burger King, the fast food workers weren't accepting the pay before, and these fast food places and other places were saying that that we have a labor shortage. They didn't have a labor shortage; they had a wage shortage, and people were being rehired at a higher rate, and that's why we had worker strife. That's why we had more organizing happening during COVID. So it's actually the opposite of what American university administration was claiming. It was the year to do it, and there's worker strife, and that they should have been concerned about that, but they're really out of touch, and especially when you have a union busting lawyer. Imagine what they've paid that firm for the last 8 months. They could have paid the raise we're asking for just from what they've paid a firm to negotiate for.
Except that from their point of view, they would have to do it every year.
Exactly. They'd have to do it. It's a matter of control. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Can you? There's a lot to discuss here, but I'm also aware of the time. We're trying to keep this to a particular time. But what can we expect on the horizon? My question to you as an organizer and long-time activist, as an author, as a writer, you also work on film, I know that, and you gave a talk on film and cinema at George Mason, and so on and so forth. With all of the hats that you have, you must have a good sense of these things. In terms of the horizon for the future, can the adjunct situation be dealt with properly without a broader movement about labor in general?
No.
That's my question.
No, it can't be. And what you see now is the way, for example, SEIU had a beginning that's very radical, that was very grassroots based. And a lot of the unions have fallen into kind of business unionism, which is basically just trying to get more members, right? And not really fighting to increase wages and stuff. And this has changed because workers are not putting up with that anymore. And I think that when you see at like SEIU, when decades ago, they would actually work with the parking attendants union and other workers in DC to do on-the-ground actions that really brought attention to the rights of, for example, janitors that are working in the city. You know, there was a campaign, Justice for Janitors. It was historic. It changed everything. They thought it was a pivotal moment in labor history in the United States, and it was. But, you know, with SEIU, you had things like, basically, we would, I was participating in supporting these demonstrations. And for example, when they took money away from schools and gave it to the real estate millionaires in Washington, D.C. that year, they took $10 million from the schools and gave it a tax cut to one guy there. Wow. The SEIU and the parking attendants and the Justice for Janitors, they organized a demonstration which actually attracted all the police to us. We were in the one that's supposed to attract them away from 14th Street Bridge. And then on 14th Street Bridge during rush hour, they brought in a bus load of activists, and they blocked the 14th Street Bridge during rush hour. They actually moved sideways like this and began to unload and set up a makeshift classroom on the 14th Street Bridge to bring attention to that. The reason why I'm telling you this is because right now this is triggering a broader, you know, like there's pressure right now on all of these unions that had a radical beginning to return to their radical roots, because they're being pushed from the grassroots level to return to these, and we can't succeed unless there's a nationwide fight for this kind of thing. And it goes hand in hand with the fact that we were promised by the Biden administration that there will be a huge forgiveness, student loan forgiveness, that's not coming through. There has been some kind of forgiveness, but there hasn't. But that has to fold in to the national movement for adjuncts, and I believe it is rippling across the nation in terms of these actions. And I believe that what happened at American University has turned a lot of heads, not just regionally but nationally. And I think unions are going to be acting in a different way. You're going to see more action and less business unionism, and that's the only way it's going to happen. It's not going to happen at AU only. It'll only happen if it happens regionally.
It has to happen regionally. It has to happen even outside the realm of academia and adjunctism and so on.
Absolutely.
It's not. We're talking about adjuncts, but there are many other sorts of jobs
Exactly.
that also suffer. In fact, suffer a lot more simply because the prestige issue. At least adjuncts makes it out there because people are concerned about who's teaching their students,
Right.
their sons and daughters.
Yeah.
But there are other jobs where people just, they're just almost invisible.
Right. Yeah.
Do you think what you're talking about as a potential development, which is positive for the adjunct world, is something that we're likely to see under I'm not going to say under this administration, because this is sort of American-centric approach, this administration, that administration,
Right.
as though there isn't a system underneath that actually propels things regardless of who's on top.
Exactly.
But under these conditions where people are, in general, a lot more concerned about inflation, about their gas tank and how much it costs, about food, about what it takes to actually make it and how they need to stretch their existing income. Is this a context in which anything can be done about this? It seems to me that it's almost like this has to be put on the shelf for now, unfortunately, not in terms of trying and struggling for better conditions in the adjunct world, but in terms of outcomes. It seems to me that raising this issue now is going to fall on deaf ears, even though we shouldn't stop raising it.
Sure, of course. When it comes to things like inflation, when we talk about inflation, that's been brought up in negotiations, and it's because the cost of living increase, obviously with inflation, has increased as a percentage, and Washington DC, for example, was last year their cost of living increase was 5.6%, and usually universities don't even blink, about giving a raise according to the cost of living. But in this case, we were just asking for a raise that's on par with the cost of living in Washington D.C., and that's not what we got, like 1% or less. Basically, what they gave us is a $25 raise per semester. So actually, inflation and cost of living have propelled us to ask actually for more.
Well, that gets you 3 coffees at Starbucks.
Exactly. It's funny because one of the adjuncts says "coffee for everybody" when they announced that. Coffee for everybody on me.
I
as a joke.
that to be. Okay, well, we would love to keep up a conversation on this topic. We'd love to host you again. And before I let you go, I would like you to share with us a little bit about your radio show, which a lot of people listen to, Shai Wanana.
Right, Shai Wanana. So Shai Wanana started about 5 or 6 years ago.
You're Americanizing the name.
You're not
Shai
doing
Wanana.
I wish I had given it another name that was more easily pronounceable, because a lot of the people that announce the show are not Arabic speakers.
So they say Shai Wanana?
Shai Wanana.
Which it sounds like this guy called Shai,
right?
And then a gal called Nana, or something, or vice versa, whatever.
Yeah, and actually for a jazz station, sometimes it comes out musically, like like in the 50s, shalalala or what a Shai, like it comes out as of one of those kind of expressions you had in the songs.
Yeah. Do you want to share what it
Sure.
means?
So Shai Wanana means tea and mint, basically. And the idea was, I was approached 6 years ago by the one of the manager at the time, the interim manager of the station, and she said to me, Katia Stitt, who's the daughter of a famous local jazz musician. She's an amazing activist, a great pro-Palestinian activist, an African American, African American resident of DC. And she approached me and said, there's a gap in our reporting. We hear about the Arab world a little bit in the morning at 8 a.m. on WPFW, on the Pacifica stations from Democracy Now! But we really don't have a kind of a focus on the Arab world. And we have that gap. And now we have this opening, the slot from 2 to 3 p.m. on Wednesdays here in DC. And we were wondering if you'd be interested in doing that kind of show. And I said I would love to do it. And the way I would do it is that to balance it between politics and culture. So basically, when we came up with the name, it was a name that basically where the T kind of represents the heavier stuff, the politics, and the Nana was like the lighter, the
Flesh.
Cultural stuff. So that to inspire and refresh and provide splendor and so on and so forth. So, for example, this summer I'm focusing a lot on writers and poets that are Arab Americans. Or like last couple of weeks ago, I interviewed a Kurdish poet that I met in New York when I read in New York recently in the East Village. And I'll be interviewing an Egyptian American poet and later a Sudanese American poet and so on and so forth. And also we cover stories because we follow Africa Now that also connect, because we have, as the Arab world has North Africa, we have Africa also like transitioning sometimes. So, for example, there's a news story, and I don't know how much you've heard about it, but it's the Maasai tribe is being evicted right now in Tanzania. Because the Emiratis want like a playground for game,
which is perfectly
hunting.
Reasonable to evict human beings because you'd like a playground.
Yeah. So the government is actually killing them, and also planning to evict 70,000 Maasai warriors. Wow. These are people who are sent off at age 12 to bring in a lion or for their ceremony, for their. They actually have to. Every Maasai warrior has to do this at age 12 when they become a man. So of course they're fighting back, but they're fighting back with spears and such. So it ties with the Arab world because it's the Emiratis that are causing this issue, right? And so I'm about to interview, for example, Sudanese activists that are trying to get the story out because they're, the Tanzanian government's trying to do this in the stealth of the night. And as you know, like the Maasai warriors sometimes is a stand-in for the African continent because they advertise that it's an exotified kind of face of Africa, right? Yeah, and so those are the kinds of shows, and I play a lot of times when I interview people. I would ask them, what kind of music do they like? What are they listening to? And I would play that music. So it's literature, music, and
personalized.
And news. Yeah, and our slogan is unspinning the news and spinning the tunes.
Nice. Nice. It sounds like the Fox News slogan. No spin, of course.
No spin.
Zain, I have one more quick question before I let you go.
Sure.
With respect to the adjunct continuing crisis, do you see a more severe treatment or problematic treatment that has to do with gender and race when it comes to adjuncts, or is there some sort of democracy there where everybody's treated equally bad?
Oh, no. There is definitely more accentuated, definitely people of color and women. When you talk about, especially when like universities might use student evaluations, which are a lot of times arbitrary, you could see how students evaluate, according to gender. For example, there was a study by the Chronicle of Higher Education that showed that students tend to mention the professor's appearance only when they're evaluating a woman, right, that's teaching, a female professor.
Which is customary, actually, even with tenured professors.
Yes. And
so that crosses the line.
Yeah, and that's been coming up in negotiations where adjuncts of color are obviously, they're being paid less, and also like at American University and all, especially for Arab adjuncts, for Arab professors, like I have a Palestinian colleagues that are under constant attack. I always describe it, there's an Israel Studies department at American universities that was formed as a reaction to when the Arab World Studies department was formed, which is tiny and undernourished and underfunded. A lot of like people on the board of trustees and other places said, well, we have to have the other voice, the Israel Studies. Of course, when the Israel Studies was put together, they funded, there was a lot of money, it has a lot of resources, but more importantly, it became a place to attack the Arab World Studies. It's almost like this bird that the cuckoo bird that basically lays its eggs in another bird's nest, and when the hatchlings hatch, they knock out the native eggs and start to thrive in that nest. That's the same thing that happens. So, but fortunately, we have directors and the chair person in our departments are very supportive, and they kind of buffer these attacks. So when we wanted to hold a discussion on Palestine, there was a lot of messages coming in from the higher up in the administration questioning this event or asking for copies of the event, and we knew it was coming from people that are funding the Israeli Studies Department and so on and so forth, that are on the board of trustees or otherwise. So we have, in addition to the gender factor, in addition to the race factor, specifically, Arab professors,
political factors.
We're constantly, on our toes because we have to be, because we're constantly being attacked, or like, for example, I have a colleague that basically assigned a reading that basically talked about the children, Palestinian children, the number of them that are being arrested, underage children, and there was a formal complaint about her that she was propagating blood libel conspiracies, in an anti-Semitic way. Obviously, when we talk about blood libel, we talk about these old anti-Semitic tropes about Jews drinking the blood of children and so on, so which is where they got from the prisoner issue to the blood libel is but the colleague had to take it seriously. Unfortunately, she had the whole department behind her and managed to defend herself. But so all these things are factors. Gender, race, and
politics and maybe ethnicity. I mean, and it's probably not confined to Arabs, because I understand in Hindu studies there's a very, very strong movement that sanctions people who are critical of what's going on in India.
Right.
So there's also a dimension that is growing rapidly. Zain, thank you so much for this really insightful, quick conversation. I hope that we can speak with you again soon. I hope under better circumstances, although I am not going to hold my breath for the time being. Welcome to our podcast, and I wish you the best. Would you have any closing words?
Thanks so much. It's such a pleasure. And I love the opportunity of reuniting with you again. I haven't seen you for so long. And
Same here.
yeah,
Same here.
no, it's been my absolute pleasure to be here.
Shukran, Habibi. And I will close with a quick image that has to do with your book.